Rich Delaney was from a small town in Vermont, but his job with the railroad had him stationed nearly 1,000 miles away, out in Ohio. His wife and 2 boys stayed behind in Vermont while he worked, but after a few months apart, Rich decided it was time to bring his family out to join him. He started looking for a place to rent and found a room at a good price, though the landlord asked for 2 months' rent up front, which Rich paid without much thought. Barely a month into living there, the room and the landlord started showing their true colors. At one point, the landlord even suggested, out of nowhere, that Rich send his family away for a week or 2. Rich brushed it off. What followed over the next several weeks would chill anyone to the bone. This story comes from 1987, and the man who lived it has asked that his name be changed, so throughout this telling, we'll call him Sam. Rich and his wife Diane had 2 sons, Sam, the elder, and his younger brother Danny. Not long after settling into Ohio, Rich was transferred again, this time to Chicago. Sam was 4 years old at the time, Danny just 2. Rich figured a move to the city would be good for the family. Steady food, a real school for Sam, better opportunities all around. So he started house hunting in Chicago and eventually found a room in a quiet, older neighborhood called Ash Grove. The room was small, but the price was right. There was another reason it appealed to Rich too. His sister-in-law, Carol, lived just 1 street over. If something came up while Rich was at work, Diane and the boys would have somewhere close by to go. The landlord, an elderly man named Mr. Whitfield, asked for 2 months' advance rent, and Rich paid it on the spot, already picturing how well things would work out with family nearby. The house itself was laid out like this. Through the front gate was a wide, open yard where the Whitfields kept a few old cots out under a couple of big shade trees. Past the yard, the Whitfields' own quarters were on the left. Directly across from them, on the right, was a room that belonged to their son, who worked overseas and only came back to visit once every couple of years, otherwise it stayed locked. Upstairs was a long corridor with 2 more rooms. One was locked. The other, the Delaneys took for themselves. There was no separate kitchen or bathroom. Diane set up a stove in the corner of their one big room, and the only bathroom was downstairs, next to the Whitfields' own place. Before they moved in, Rich had mentioned the room to Carol. She'd warned him, "I've heard things about that place. Look somewhere else." But Rich was a practical man, and the price was too good to pass up. Plus, with Carol just up the street, it seemed like the safer bet if anything ever went wrong. So he ignored the warning. They moved in that February, just as the cold was setting in. The Whitfields, both getting on in years, seemed genuinely pleased to have a young family in the house. But there was something they never told the Delaneys, something that would come back to haunt them, quite literally, before long. For the first few days, Diane felt uneasy in a way she couldn't quite explain. She chalked it up to the stress of the move. Rich took a few days off to help them settle in, but on his first day back at work, he told Diane he'd be traveling out to the rail yard for paperwork and might not be home until 10 or 11 that night. With Rich gone for the day, Diane decided she and the boys would rather spend it at Carol's. They left early and stayed the whole day, only heading back around 7 that evening so Diane could get dinner started. She lit the stove near the front gate, sat down on the cot, and began cooking. About 5 or 10 minutes in, she glanced up at the curtain hanging over the gate and saw a shadow pass across it. Someone walking by, right outside their door. She went out to look and realized the shadow had come from the locked room upstairs across the hall, the one that was supposed to be empty. She walked over and checked, still locked. She told herself maybe Rich had come back early for something and gone again. But there were no phones back then to check. She went back to her cooking, unsettled. 90 minutes later, Rich came home. Diane immediately asked him, "When did you come upstairs earlier? Where did you go after that?" Rich had no idea what she was talking about. He'd been at the rail yard all day. Diane told him everything, and Rich, exhausted, told her she must have imagined it. They ate and went to bed. Diane barely slept. All night, she was certain she heard someone pacing slowly up and down the hallway. The next day, Rich left for work, and Diane asked Sam to keep an eye on his little brother while she went downstairs to do the wash. A little while later, Sam came running down the stairs screaming. Diane found a young woman sitting on one of the cots, seemingly mid-conversation with her. Hearing Sam's screams, she rushed over. "What's wrong?" "Mom, I was upstairs with Danny," Sam said. Diane's stomach dropped. She ran back up to their room and found Danny sitting on the bed, staring straight ahead, laughing, as though someone were sitting across from him, talking. She scooped him up and carried both boys downstairs immediately. She found Mrs. Whitfield and asked carefully, "Is there someone upstairs? Is something wrong with this house?" Mrs. Whitfield went quiet for a long moment. "No," she finally said. "There's no problem here. Maybe the boy saw something that wasn't there." Diane didn't go back into that room. She finished the wash, hung it to dry, and took the boys straight to Carol's, planning to wait there until Rich got home. When she told Carol what had happened, Carol said, "I told your husband not to take that room. There's something wrong with it. No one stays there long. That's why it was sitting empty, and why you got it so cheap." Around 7:30 that evening, Rich came home to find the front door locked. He walked over to Carol's, and the whole family came back together. Just behind the house ran a narrow alley, and at the far wall of their room was a window that looked out over it. Beneath the window sat an old table and chair the previous tenants had left behind. Mr. Whitfield had told Rich they were welcome to use them. Diane still didn't feel right. She kept sensing that someone was moving around the room, watching them. After lunch one afternoon, with both boys down for a nap, she lay down beside them around 4 o'clock and pulled a blanket over herself against the cold. About 2 hours later, she woke suddenly. Someone had gently pulled the blanket off her. She sat up, checked the hallway through the gate. No one there. She told herself she must have dreamed it. That evening, as she sat by the gate starting dinner, she heard a knock at the window. She got up to answer it, then stopped halfway, remembering they were on the second floor. There was no way anyone could be knocking from the alley below. As that thought crossed her mind, a low growl rose from the window, angry, guttural. Diane bolted from the room screaming. The Whitfields came running at the noise. Mr. Whitfield asked immediately, "Where are the children?" "Upstairs," Diane said, and they all ran back up. They found Sam on the bed, crying hysterically. "Mom, how did he get here? He's going to take us with him." The Whitfields turned and quietly went back downstairs. Diane, furious now, went to confront them, and on her way through the corridor, she saw someone slip into the locked room next to theirs, right in front of her. She marched the boys down to the Whitfields and demanded answers. "You never told us anyone was up there. This room isn't safe. We don't just imagine things every day." The elderly couple insisted, trembling, that it was nothing. "Probably a cat," they said. Diane wasn't having it. "We're not staying here another second," she told them, and took the boys straight back to Carol's. When Rich got home to another locked door, he found his family at Carol's, and Diane laid into him. "We can't live in that house. You're gone all day. We're the ones who have to deal with it. Either we find a new place or we go back to Vermont." Rich, thinking of the money they'd already sunk into rent, asked her to give it one more month before they looked elsewhere. That night, he managed to talk her into going back. But what happened the next day would be worse than anything before it. It was Sunday. Rich didn't have work. The family slept in, and once everyone was up, Rich went down to shower while the boys lounged in bed. Diane had her back to them, cooking breakfast, when Sam suddenly fell off the bed. "Mom, you pushed me!" he cried out, and before Diane could even process what he'd said, he started screaming even louder. As she rushed to calm him, she heard a woman's voice, low and close to her ear. "Get out of here, or I'll kill everyone." Diane grabbed Sam and ran for the stairs. Halfway down, she felt hands shove her from behind. She fell the rest of the way with Sam in her arms, trying desperately to shield him. His head struck the ground and began to bleed. Rich came running at the screaming and found Sam bleeding badly. Furious, he snapped at Diane, accusing her of not watching the kids properly. She tried to explain. She hadn't fallen on her own. Someone had pushed her. But Rich wasn't listening. He carried Sam upstairs, bandaged the cut, and the family sat in stunned silence, unsure what to do. Diane broke down crying. Rich, feeling guilty for how harshly he'd spoken, eventually calmed her down, and they agreed to stay just a little longer while they quietly started looking for another place. That evening, after dinner at Carol's, Rich told Diane to head back with the boys and pack a few things. He had some letters to write and would follow later. Alone in the room, he sat down at the old table by the window to write to his parents back in Vermont. Phones weren't an option, so a letter would have to do. Just a few seconds in, there was a knock at the window. Rich figured it was a would-be thief and grabbed a stick that was leaning nearby. He struck the window hard and shouted that he was still home, that he'd call the police if whoever it was didn't leave. The knocking stopped. He went back to writing. Then, a strange heaviness settled over the room, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. He looked up toward the window and pulled back the curtain. A young woman was there. Her eyes were wide open, hair falling across her face, her expression twisted with rage, and she was floating, level with the second-story window, staring straight at him. "Get out of here alive," she said, "or I'll kill everyone." Rich bolted from the room, locked the door behind him, and ran straight to Carol's house. When Diane asked why he'd come back so soon, he only said he'd gotten bored being there alone. He didn't tell her what he'd seen. The next morning, Rich went straight to Mr. Whitfield. "We're done. We're moving out today." Diane, confused, asked what had changed his mind so suddenly. She thought he'd wanted to wait it out. Rich didn't explain. He simply asked Whitfield to deduct half a month's rent and return the rest, along with their deposit. Whitfield tried to talk him into staying at least a full month while he found a new tenant. Rich refused outright, full refund or nothing. That's when Whitfield made one last strange offer. "Send the family back to Vermont for a couple of weeks," he said, "and stay behind himself in the meantime. The Whitfields would take care of him. When things feel more normal, you can bring them back." Rich was stunned. "They're already enrolled in school. I can't just send them away like that." A brief, tense argument followed. That same day, the Delaneys moved everything they owned to Carol's house and began looking for a new place in earnest. Within a few days, they'd found one. Once they were settled, Rich finally told Diane everything that had happened that last night. The knock, the girl at the window, all of it. Later, Carol's husband made some inquiries around the old neighborhood, asking if anyone knew what had gone on in that house. What they learned was this. The Whitfields had a daughter, 22 or 23 at the time, whose room had been the locked one upstairs, across from Sam's. She'd fallen in love with someone her parents didn't approve of and wanted to marry him. Whitfield refused to allow it. She tried everything to change his mind, and when nothing worked, she took her own life in that room. Her parents, humiliated and angry, barely gave her a proper burial. And because of that unresolved grief and rage, people said, her spirit never left the house. Neighbors also mentioned that a family who moved in afterward had a son who, while flying a kite on the roof one afternoon, fell from the railing. He suffered a severe head injury and was rushed to the hospital. Before he died, he told his parents that someone had pushed him from the front, though nobody else had been up there.